Today, I got the test that might end up saving my arm, and it was not a pleasant or a fun test, but if it ends up saving my arm, I'm willing to suffer now to have an arm later. Initially, it was just this. This was the electrical portion, and this was easy. They used this little device to run electricity through the nerves in my hand and arm and shoulder to check whether they had function, basically whether the nerves were connected. It then popped up on the screen and was recorded the strength and any blockages in all those neural pathways. And people had warned me that this was going to be a really unpleasant, really painful experience. And up to this point, I was like, yeah, it's a little shocked, but I don't understand what they're talking about. But then they got to the next part. This was him installing a needle that's running electrical current into my arm. They had to do that to test about 14 different muscles and 14 different neural pathways. It doesn't seem like a big deal to just jab a needle in your arm. But when you jab a needle in your arm and then you run electricity through it and you do it over and over and over, it's almost like death by 1,000 cuts. Because the first time and the second time I was like, oh, this isn't so bad. After a while, I was just like, man, this sucks. And this was relatively early in the procedure, but you can already see the mess of alcohol pads they used to clean the areas, the gauze they used to dab all the blood away, because every time you stick a needle in somebody, they tend to bleed. It was an experience. And so there's good news and bad news. When I initially had the injury and I partially severed the arm, I had an amazing surgical team that basically put the arm back together. I was like Humpty Dumpty. I'm able to move my hand, I'm able to move my fingers, but I still have no movement of the bicep and no movement of the deltoid. And they thought that was just part of the healing. It was a trauma, so the body was responding. But after 2 months of that not working, the doctor was like, man, it's got to be something else. Maybe it's your brachial plexus. Maybe it's the massive nerves in your shoulder. And today's test, in fact, confirmed that I have major damage to the brachial plexus. This nerve cluster in my shoulder, it's not sending any signal to the deltoid, not sending any signal to the bicep. So while I do have sensation, I do have strength in other areas, those are getting nothing. And there seem to be 3 options or 3 possibilities. One is it'll heal on its own. They said there's about 18 months of regrowth and it's possible that it'll connect itself within those 18 months without anything else happening. The second option is surgery. They transplant a nerve from somewhere else. They basically recreate that connection. They just wire the nerves together so I actually can fire that signal again. And the third option is I just don't get my arm back. I don't get my bicep or my delt back. I'm able to use my hand, which is great, but I have to carry my arm around using the other arm, or I have to come up with some really cool prosthetic. And I have mixed feelings, because on the one hand, after really struggling PT and running the max level E-stim through the bicep and thinking that if I just try harder or I try something else, it's almost nice to know that there's just no nerve connection there, that it's not anything I was doing. There's literally no way that that arm could fire. On the other hand, it feels kind of powerless, but I just have to accept it. This is where I'm at. I made my choices. I ended up in this situation. How am I going to make the best of it? Well, I'm going to do all the PT. I'm going to do all the nerve glides. I'm going to do everything I can, and hopefully my arm will come back. But if it won't, I'll just have to make the best of that too, because ultimately, the only thing we can do is make the best of where we are. Anything else is just nonsense in our head.